The World Day for Cultural Diversity, for Dialogue and Development, and super excited to be having this dialogue. I think we need to be having more of these dialogues. Tell me a little bit about your business, Anya.
So it's a global training company. We train managers and executive and leadership teams, HR, in inclusion and diversity, in inclusive management skills, and how to bring humanity to organizations.
We equip leaders to work with those who are different than them, and we do that through mitigating bias and helping them integrate culture into their business metrics.
How do you define culture and diversity, and why is it important? Why does it matter?
Culture is the set of values, beliefs, experiences, behaviors that a group holds in common. And when I say group, also that could be, a community, that could be an organization, a team within an organization, a family, an ethnic group, a religious group, whatever group. So cultural diversity is basically that variety of values, of beliefs, of experiences across these groups. And it's great that you asked me why does it matter, because I don't think we can talk about cultural diversity without talking about why it's so important. I think it's important because it's about acknowledging one another's visible and invisible differences, and recognizing that that power in the collective of these differences is what makes us stronger as a society, stronger as a world, which is why this is a World Day today, a world celebration. So if we talk about that also, it's important that we talk about recognizing groups that are across the world being minoritized and marginalized, and needing to provide these groups with access to opportunities, with resources, with what they need to thrive and succeed. And so what I'm talking about there is that cultural diversity, with that comes with it that need for creating meaningful participation for all cultural groups. It's embedded in that. And embedded in that is also this cultural humility piece, right? We don't want to pretend we are the experts on other groups. They are the experts on their own needs and goals. So definitely today is this recognition that there's so much that we can achieve together through the diversity of our identities and the experiences that we bring.
Diversity is being invited to a party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Right? How often we invite people to the party, but then they stay and we're with our own cliques. Belonging, here's the belonging. Belonging is knowing the playlist. And I definitely like to say that growing up in almost like poverty, I was born in USSR, had a single mom who was raising 2 kids, had 3 jobs, was never home. I definitely got triggered often by the word privilege. And I'm super passionate about breaking it down, that there's a white privilege, and I'm a white woman, I'm queer. There's a lot of like different identities that we can discuss. I have visible advantages, I have invisible disadvantages, but it definitely grew up in a social status that was poverty, but white was this privileged status. And I like to talk about social identity. Being white means that we belong. People like us made history. People like us are on TV. We can ensure to be in a group of people like other white women with no problem. So I think so many people get triggered by the word privilege when they didn't have money. Privilege has nothing to do, white privilege has nothing to do with money. That's a social privilege, right? So that's kind of my take on like where I integrate into the diversity work. And I also believe that everybody has a diversity story. Everybody at some point in their life felt like the other, like they didn't belong.
The identity that you have now, as you just described, has that always been with you, or has that been a discovery process throughout your life?
No, Oh, you're asking me such good questions. I also actually want to know about a little bit of your story of diversity, if you have one that comes to mind. But yes, I feel like I went through multitude of different identities, right? And dimensions of identity. Again, one was nationality. My first language is Russian. I was born in Eastern Europe. I was straight. I was married to a man. I had children in my first marriage. In my 30s, I came out as a gay woman. Now I'm married to another woman. So that changed over a period of time. I went through living in Estonia to being Canadian to now being in the United States. My educational level changed. My career have changed. My marital status have changed. My parental status has changed. My financial status has changed. And those are all the amazing things that are so important to talk about, how our identities change throughout our life and circumstances.
So let's talk about companies, which unfortunately don't always get it right. What can even small, mid-sized, large companies do to foster that diversity?
It's not for lack of intention, right? So sometimes it's really the commitment is there, the intention is there, it's just the how. So, and before even promoting cultural diversity, I think it's important to look at how we are working to develop the inclusion mindset and the skills of those that are already on the team, that are already internally, in order to, promote cultural diversity, attract, to bring people who are different than us. And so that when they're there, kind of not exhibiting maybe the dominant behaviors or the behaviors of the majority, how are we able to work with them effectively and embrace them and actually learn from these perspectives? But if we don't set goals and if we don't track metrics for diversity and inclusion, we're not going to get there. So I'm talking about all practices of business. So looking at hires, so talent hires, onboarding, promotions, advancement, looking at marketing practices, sales tactics, supplier diversity. How do you approach that? This is all top of mind right now. And this usually means having a team internally for that. I don't want to say a person because it's not enough to do it to a person. And this is something that should be owned and promoted by everyone. So we need a team, but we need really anybody who takes charge to build the capacities of the leaders so that they are integrating inclusion and the right equity and diversity lens in everything that they're doing every day, but also to create a collective accountability for performing on these goals.
What's happening right now? What's the tone? What are companies thinking about? What are they doing? What are they implementing? What are they getting right? And where do they still have work to do?
Everyone is crazy about hiring diverse talent. We need diverse talent. I think we've talked enough. People understand the business case for diversity of thoughts, ideas, education, perspectives, representing the market, right? We often ask, okay, who's missing at a table? Women are buying more and more things. Women of color are buying more and more things. So we have to take that into account. So that's kind of like the tone where I think companies are finally understanding the diversity piece. What they struggle with is inclusion and retention, because if your culture is not inclusive, diverse talent is hard right now. Diverse talent is expensive. They go to recruiters, they hire, they onboard, but if your culture is not inclusive, they leave. And this is why we see this resignation where people are no longer willing to tolerate the idea of like, oh, we'll hire you as long as you fit in. I will tolerate your diversity as long as you can become one of us, versus, okay, what is we call it organizational identity? Who are all the people that are at a table? And I think that's where we come in and kind of talk a lot about trust, psychological safety, how to build relationship. I like to differentiate. There's a transactional, right, diversity, and then there's transformational. And transactional is all about numbers. How many people of color did we hire? How many people of color left? How many, those are all the numbers. And transformational is about stories. Who joined, why they joined, why are they passionate about what we do? Why would they stay or why would they leave? And I think that's where I hope to see that companies start investing more and more in building those, first educating all of their employees, and then building the cultures, like really authentically inclusive cultures where people feel that they belong. Like, those are my people. I love people that I work with. So one of the things that we need to, and if you are in a company, right, no matter how big you are, is of course to align on our diversity and inclusion as a leadership team. It always starts with the leadership team, right? What kind of company do we want to create? What is the work environment? I know some people are already allergic to the word culture, but it is a cultural diversity is really, culture is a collection of individual behaviors. What kind of work environment do you want to create? Once we get clarity, okay, here's what's important to us. Here's the type of people we want to work with. These are the markets that we serve. Here's the product. Then I think every team has its own microculture. And I think where we see in our business cases, the biggest impact we have is when we start training those team leaders or managers in those inclusive management skills. That's where we train them. Okay, how do biases show up in hiring, promotion, performance review, coaching, how to have one-on-one conversation? Because honestly, it all comes down to two things. Do people trust me to be honest with me? And do we have explicit team agreements where it's safe to voice your opinions? And those are the two things that HR cannot build it. Leadership team cannot build it. If we can say, oh, like the executives are responsible for that. I think it really comes down to my team lead. People leave because of managers and people stay because of managers. So if we can train those team leaders in inclusive leadership skills where they know every human being on their team and they know how to include them and engage them. And that's, I think, what will then kind of like the ripple effect will go across organization. Let's talk about like white privileged men feel so much shame and they feel like, well, I don't have a voice, like that's not my story to say. And this is where we start seeing them on the outside versus saying, where in your life have you felt like the other? Maybe you were the only child of divorced parents. Maybe you were the only one who was not married. Maybe you're the only one who had a car growing up. And no matter how big or small, it's the feeling of I'm not one of you. I don't feel like I belong here, or feeling less than. Because I'll give you an example. We do this kind of very interactive exercises, and what I've noticed that people with the most privilege in a room and people with the least privilege in a room feel the exact same amount of shame.
One more that's really important internally is employee resource groups. There's a huge need for it. For a while, they went through that period of, we're not sure, does that really help us, bring diversity? And are we creating too much affinity and being stuck in your own little world of people just like you? Especially with the pandemic and with what we've all been through and the need for affinity, for solidarity. It's important to recognize that these groups do not have to be only the people that identify with that identity of the group, right? It can be allies, it can be people who are coming in to support. And that's a great way of bridging the internal with the external through the activities of the ERG. Recognizing that this is an ongoing process, it's not a one and done thing, so that it's really authentic out to the world. That's going to make people come to you. Showing that you recognize culture and diversity are fluid. The company needs to keep up with that, and also start by putting your money where your mouth is and creating a plan for how you're going to implement things, and then how it's going to go back to make sure that we're holding each other accountable and moving forward on what we set to do.
Even if you have 5 people on your team, do you know their diversity story? Do you know what matters to them? Do you know what helps them feel alive? Do you know what turns them on? Do you know what they're passionate about? Like, those are, I think, the questions that start today. Yeah. Get to know your people. That it's simple. It's actually simple.
Really, if we're truly inclusive and equitable, we recognize that we need to showcase and lift up, especially those that may not necessarily have a platform on a regular basis. When we look at what's dominant around them, around us, in business culture overall, what practices we put, who are the people that when we see pictures tend to be mostly in leadership and in decision making, and not even just in the for-profit world, even in the non-profit world, the government world, in our communities, who's really getting platforms, who's getting the microphone. And so just because I hand over the microphone to somebody because they've had a voice for a very long time, it doesn't mean it's not coming back to you. It's coming back. We can pass the microphone on. Everybody could get a voice. And in fact, with lifting all of our voices, this is what today is about, that collective lifting and amplifying all of our voices is what we need. So, and if we just keep saying that, then we won't start anywhere. And I mean, it's great because all of this says is that doing these things is what opens up the door to more conversations about this. And now we can go through and talk like you and I are talking, and tell me your why. Like, why are you feeling that way? And why do you see this as mutually exclusive?
Diversity does get pointed to cultural, very often, right? It gets, color of skin, right. Heritage. What else do we need to be thinking about? Because we know it's beyond that, but that's where I feel like we always get stuck,
yes,
right?
Yes, so true. And like I said, sometimes it's easier to be stuck to the visible things versus the invisible things. So, but when we talk about culture, it's very broad. Like I said, it is the values and beliefs and experiences. So if you think about it, you have sexual orientation, LGBTQIA plus community. You can think about from purposes of abilities and disabilities. Think about it from a religious standpoint, socioeconomic standpoint as well. Even do I have somebody in my family who's been through the justice system, the legal system, in prison and jail, whatever. That in of itself brings in a certain dynamic to the family to access to things, and it influences the culture of the family, of the group. When we think about culture, we have to think very broadly. It can mean even a field of practice. So when you talk with engineers versus when you talk with people in finance versus when you talk with attorneys versus when you talk with doctors, if you've ever really sat for extended hours with each one of these groups, you would know it's palpable. The language, the differences, because that is in of itself its own culture. The jargon, the words, the terminology, what acronyms mean in each one of these groups. The same acronym could mean completely two different opposing things. So that's, I think you're right. Oftentimes we get stuck on that, and not that it's not an important factor, but even within our cultural ethnic groups, there are these other subcultures I'm talking about. And sometimes within our ethnic groups, people are being marginalized. So you've got a group of people of color, but the subculture of the LGBTQIA plus, that's not getting the same access, or a certain religious group as well. So that's a great question, because today is the day where we need to think very broadly about cultural diversity.
So there's one thing, right? People say, oh, I don't see color. And I think that is actually incorrect. I think we should see color, and we should see the color that's missing on our team. So there's definitely that. And I also know there's a lot of pushback from managers, right? That A, I don't have the candidates. B, I want to hire the best person. And I agree, hire the best person, but at least give an opportunity, people of color, to be on your roster, on your list of candidates. And that's, as a hiring manager, as an HR, I would demand to have a list that has different identities on my list, and race and color is one of them. From a perspective of, like, we talk a lot about equality, right? Equality says everybody needs the same. Well, I'm more a proponent of equity. Equity is different people need different things, and we don't have the same starting point. When everyone is like, well, let's hire the best candidate. I can tell you that the best candidate is someone who had social networks of people with power, someone who had networks to have paid internship, someone who has beautiful smile, that means healthcare, someone, and it goes on and on and on and on. So I would invite hiring managers, hire the best candidate for sure, but make sure that at least you have different people, different races on your candidate list. So that's one piece. And the second piece is do an audit of your team and hire for skills and diversity. Cultural fit is a group thing. Cultural fit is a losing strategy. Cultural fit means I'm going to go with an affinity bias, meaning I resonate and like people like me. I like you because you look like me. You sound like me. We went to the same school. That's why people ask, right? Where did you grow up? Where do you live? What neighborhood are you from? What school did you go to? So I can quickly place you into a box. It allows me, I think the illusion is I can kind of predict your behavior. But it's not true. And again, it's super biased. So I would invite to kind of do your due diligence and homework and identify what skills are missing on my team, what strengths, what cultural backgrounds are missing. If you have everybody with like MBA, then maybe you should hire someone who is like a high school dropout. What life perspective do they have?
The most basic thing that somebody today who cares for what today is about that they can do is to really take stock of your network. Who's in your network? What partnerships do you have? Is it a diverse network? Are you truly listening to others that are different than you? And I think if I start with myself that way, because that's easy, look at your family, look at your community, look at your neighborhood, and ask yourself, how am I when I get out and seek these perspectives? How do I also, in the presence of these people, treat them like a whole person? Truly see them for the human that they are, and sit back and listen and truly find out what I can do to support. Not so I can shine, or not so I can, get the good job, you're an awesome ally or whatever, but truly recognizing this is about this person, what they need. I have a responsibility for that. So I would say you can start, looking at who's in your groups that are just like you. And we each of us have a responsibility to move them along this journey together, because we're more likely to be heard by members of our own groups and people who have that deeper connection with us. So I'd say that's really something I want to get out, because it's very easy to do, to challenge those around us. Are you being equitable? Are you being inclusive?
Forget the work environment. Like as a human being, like let's stop making assumptions and actually ask each other, like, what do you like? What do you enjoy? Tell me your story.
There's a study that was recently released that basically kind of validated what Leonard Franklin had always said about, for some of us who have had privilege, basically, equality can feel like oppression. And so, and really, it's a great study that was just done, because it kind of shows us that sometimes even we jeopardize our own success because we're so focused on making sure that these other people are not succeeding and they're not getting the stage. And in fact, it comes back to hurt us. And when we think of how the world will look like and future generations, and why cultural diversity right now is, we're all going to be a blend and shade of something if we just talk about ethnicity. The future is coming. And so we need to think also about the future generations and stewardship around that.